Hi friends, you are welcome back to Physique Fashion House channel. My name is Fola. We are grateful for as many that has been subscribing to this channel. And if you have not subscribed, do well to subscribe today. Thank you. Today we will be learning how to make a collarless blazer. Here is the pattern drafting come with. The shoulder length is 15 inches divided by 2, 7.5 plus 0.5, making 8 inches. I use 3 inches by 3 inches as the wideness and depth of my front neckline, and shoulder slope of 1 inch. I come down with 1 inch to slope my shoulder, and the chest line is 8 inches. Bust point is 10 inches. Waist or half length is 16 and a half. Hip line of this jacket is 21 inches, and I added some like 4 inches to give it the sharp effect it has in the front. So then we have 1 inch as our hem allowance. So for this project we don't really need the underbust, because the underbust is 13. We don't need it in this project. Firstly, let me get the nipple to nipple, that is a bust span. So the bust span we're working with is 7 inches. I divide it by 2, give me 3.5. So on the waistline, on the bust point, I mark 3.5. So I do the same thing on the waistline. I do the same thing here for the hip line. Then I connect it. So on this waistline now, I just come to the left and right with a half an inch, half an inch, half an inch. Then on the bust point, I come down with like 1 to 1.5 inches. You're good to come down with 1 or 1.5. So here, so this is, I come down by 4 inches here. Then I connect it to create my dart. So this is my dart for the front. So the next thing I will do is to begin to take my horizontal measurements. So, and the bust we are working with is 32. I divide it by 4. It gives me 8. So I mark it here. Then seam allowance of 1 to 1.5 inches. Let me just use 1 inch. So I come to the waist to measure the waist. The waist I'm working with is 28. I divide it by 4. It gives me 7 inches. So the waistline, I measure 7 inches. I return this 1 inch. That's then seam allowance of 1 inch. So on the hip line, the top hip I'm working with is 36. So I divide it by 4. It gives me 9 inches. I take 1 inch as my seam allowance. So then I connect it. Before I go ahead and connect it, let me create the armhole. So I come to the armhole line. I measure what I'm having from shoulder slope to this chest line. I have 7 inches. I divide it by 2. It gives me 3.5. I mark it. Then on it, I come in by 0.75 or 3/4. So I connect it to the shoulder slope. Then I use my French cuff to connect it to my chest line. Yeah. So then I connect from bust to my waist. Then from my waist to my to the hip of my jacket. So let me just mark the original measurements so that you see it clearly. This is the original measurement. This is the seam allowance. So the next thing I want to do now is to get the sharp edges we're seeing in the front of my jacket. So I use this my pattern master to connect it, and I'm connecting it to, you know, the original measurements. Yeah. So we're having seam allowance of 1 inch. This is it. So from this seam allowance, just come down by 1 inch. Then come to the front by 1 inch. Then you connect it just the way it is done out there. Yeah, so this is it. Any other thing? So the next thing we want to do now is to take care of the front parts, because this our jacket is not having any button in the front. It's going to be an open one, and not only open, there is a little space in the front here. So for my neckline now, I'm going to, the depth I'm going to use for my neckline now, I will be using 9 inches. 9 inches. So on this 9 inches now, I come in with 1.5. So as I come in with 1.5, I will do the same thing down here. I will come in here with 1.5. For this 9 inches depth, let's use 2 inches to come in. I'm using 2 inches to come in. Then here, I'll be using these 3 inches. So the next thing is for me to connect it now. I'll be using this to connect it. Yes. So from here now, I'll connect to this end. I'll connect from these 2 inches to this 1.5 inches. So we are going to cut off this as it is. So this is the pattern draft for the front cut. So we want to cut it out now. This is it. Now, note that you are going to, by the time you want to use it to cut out your fabric, you will be adding 1/2 inch to this side, and the 1/2 inch will be added to this hook part. So that's all. Any other allowance has been added. So this is the front cut. Now let's move straight to the back cut. And note that your fabric should be on fold when you want to cut it. Now, we want to draft the back cut of our blazer, and this is the pattern drafting. For the back cut, the length we'll be using is 21 inches. That is our hip line. We'll be stopping at the hip line for the back, which is 21 inches, and the 1 inch has been added as our allowance. And you can see that a line is drawn out. This line is not zipper allowance. I draw out 3/4, that is 0.75. 0.75 down here, I connect it. The purpose of this line is to shape our back. Our blazer is not having zipper at the back, just to shape the back. Then we have, this is our shoulder length, 8 inches. The shoulder length of the person is 15 inches. I divide it by 2. it gives me 7.5. I had half an inch joining allowance to it, making 8 inches. That is why we're having 8 inches here as our shoulder length. I came down with 1 inch as the depth of the back neck and 3 inches as the wideness of the back neck. Then I come down here with 1 inch as my shoulder slope. Then I connect it to the wideness of my neck. Then this is my chest line of 8 inches. This is the bust point, 10 inches. It will be, we are not dealing with bust at the back, but we create this line to create our dart for the back. And the back, the half back is 15.5. You know, half length in the front is 16.5. The half back is 15.5. The back is 1 inch shorter than the front. Then we have our hip line of 21 inches. So, and the half inch you are seeing up here is the, joining allowance for the shoulder. That is half inch seam allowance for the shoulder. So now let's go straight to our horizontal measurements now. The bust we are working with is 32. We divide it by 4. It gives us 8 inches. We mark 8 inches here. Then 1 inch seam allowance. You can use 1 to 1.5 inches as your seam allowance. As a matter of fact, you can add half inch to this 1 inch as your hip allowance, because the jacket is not meant to be too hot. Then the next thing we're to do is to measure our waist on the half back. And to achieve that, let's first of all create our darts. To create our dart, we consider the bust span of 3.5 inches. The nipple to nipple is 7 inches. We divide it by 2, give us 3.5. So we mark our 3.5 on this bust point. We mark the same thing here. We connect it. Then on the half back here, we come to the left and to the right with a half inch. Half inch to the right, half inch to the left. So on this bust point, we come up with 1 inch. We connect it. You can come up with 1.5, no problem. Then for the half back, we come down with 5 inches. Then we connect it with our straight ruler. So we are going to hold this as our back dart. In this case, we are not cutting it away. We are holding it. This is ordinary dart. It's not princess dart. This is the back dart. Then on our half back, we measure the waist. The waist we are working with is 28. We divide it by 4. It gives us 7 inches. So on this line, we get 7 inches. We return this 1 inch. Then we get our 1 inch seam allowance. So on the hip line, the hip measurement we are working with is the top hip is 36 inches. We divide it by 4. It gives us 9 inches. So we measure 9 inches here. Then we get our seam allowance of 1 inch. Whatever we mark here, we return it down here. Then the next thing is for us to create our armhole. So on this armhole line, we measure what we are having from from this point, from our shoulder slope to this chest line. We have 7 inches. We get the midpoint of it, which is 3.5. On it, we come in with half an inch. We connect it. Then we use our French cut to connect to this end. So this is for the back part. The next thing is for me to connect the bust to the waist, then waist to the hip. I'm connecting the original measurement first, then I'll connect the seam allowance. Then I want to shape my back now, and to achieve that, on this line, I come out on this line with quarter of an inch, then I connect it to the hop part. You can mark it on the very line. You can, for some people that their back is so enters very well, but you can use this as well. Then from there you connect to the down part. On the shoulder length, I come up with half an inch as my joining allowance. I connect it. So those are the line I'll be tracing when I'm cutting. Those are the line I'll be tracing to cut it out. Yes. So this is our pattern drafting, and then back pattern. So the next thing for me now is to cut it out. Then I cut out this to shape my back. So now, as it is now, whatever you are having left, when I come out with a quarter of an inch, we are having half inch here. So you return that half inch after this line, after this straight line, to have your 3/4 back. So on this line now, connect it back to this end. Then I connect to the upper parts. So when you use this to cut out your fabric, so this is for your back, this is the line you are going to join together. This is the way you follow your fabric as you are joining it together. So, and you will hold your darts. The same thing will be done to the front. You will hold your darts. You are not cutting out your darts. So this is the front and the back cuts. So now, before we move to the sleeve part, let me just quickly explain some things for you concerning the bodice. So when you are cutting out your lining, so you cut out your lining, and it is advisable you use the same the same fabric to cut out your front lining. It's better that way, or you share it. You get the midpoint of this your shoulder length, get the midpoint, connect it to this bust span line straight. Then ensure that you use the main fabric to cut out this side for your lining. Then you can use ordinary lining for this part, or better still, you use the whole of the same fabric to cut out your lining. Then for the lining, you reduce the length of your lining with 2 inches. So if you do it that way, if you use a half lining, the main fabric will serve like as a facing for this front cut. So for the back cut, so you cut out your lining. Then for the neckline, measure 2 inches measure 2 inches, measure 2 inches here, measure it, go round, then cut it out of your lining. When you cut it out of your lining, that is 2 inches this way, then you place it on your main fabric, add half an inch to it, then cut out the main fabric for the neckline area here. So then thereafter you reduce the length of your lining with 2 inches. So that is for the how to go about lining your blazer. So now let's move straight to the sleeve. The sleeve length I'll be working with is 23. So on this, I've come with this paper. The wideness of this paper is 14 inches by 24 and a half. So I just draw 1 inch down here. I draw it here. Then for the upper part here, I will just draw half an inch. Let me draw half an inch. I mark half an inch here. I connect it with my straight ruler. So now, what we are having here now, we are having 23 inches here. So 23 inches is the length of my sleeve. And the next thing I will do now is to, just step down with 7 inches. I mark 7 inches here. I mark 7 inches here. I do the same thing here because I want to connect it with a straight ruler. I connect it with straight ruler. This will serve as my bicep point. So from there, I will just, step down with like 6 inches. You can use 5 inches. You can use 6 inches. So this will serve as my, if you measure it from here, it gives you like 13 inches. That will serve as my elbow, line. So now this line will serve as my wrist, or cuff line. Let me just label it biceps line. So the next thing I will do now is that I get my my bicep circumference, and the bicep circumference I'm working with is 12. I divide it by 2. It gives me 6 inches. So I measure 6 inches to this side, 6 inches to this side. Then for my elbow, the elbow I'm working with is 11. I divide 11 by 2. It gives me 5 and a half. So I measure 5 and a half to this side, 5 and a half to this side. Then for my wrist measurement is 9 inches. I divide it by 2. It gives me 4 and a half. So I measure 4 and a half here. 4 and a half. So I just connect it. So the next thing I will do now is to connect from this center point. I connect to this end. This line, I measure what I'm having here. I'm having like a 9.25 here. So I divide it into 4. So what I do is that I first of all get the half of this, which is here. Then I get half of this as well. Get it here as well. So we have divided this line into 4. So the next thing we do is that on this point, we come in with a 0.5. Here we come out with a 0.75. Yes. So the next thing we'll do that will now connect it. Let me use pencil to connect before I use a marker. This will be connected to this up this way. Then this will be connected to this. Then this will be connected to this. Then you connect this to this. So when you are placing, when you are fixing your, sleeve on your fabric, this will be the front part, while this is the back. So for this back now, we are going to divide this back. I will still use a marker to trace this later. So for the back, we divide this line into 3. We get what we are having here. We're having the same thing, 9/4. We divide it into 3. If you divide 9 into 3, you're having 3 inches. So 3 point something is not even up to 0.1. So you mark it. So that is it. So on this down part, you divide it into 2 again. So you mark it. So on it, you come in with a half an inch, that is a 0.5. You come in. Then here you come out with a 0.75. Then you connect it. Yeah, so let me just use the suitable, trying to connect it. This is it. So now, before I now cut it out, I will add the seam allowance to it. I will add to this side, I will add the half an inch round. For this side, I will add the 3/4, that is 0.75 will be added to this side as my seam allowance. So half an inch will be added to this side. Now this is it. 0.75, that is 3/4 has been added by the side, and the half an inch has been added up here, and 1 inch is being added to the down part as our joining, hem allowance and the side seam allowance. So the next thing is I want to cut it out now. This is it. So note that when you are attaching this to your blazer, this will be the front part, while this one will fall at the back. Note that you will also reduce the length of the sleeve lining with 2 inches. Now, if you choose to insert zipper to beautify your jacket blazer just the way you see it in the thumbnail, all you need to do is to cut your jacket by the waistline after front and back has been joined together. So we have come to the end of today's class. So I believe you have enjoyed this class, and let me know by dropping your comments on the comment section. And to know more about corporate wears, blazer, jackets, and the office trouser, just register for our online class. So share this video with your friends. Like this video. Your liking goes a long way, and as many that has not subscribed to our channel, ensure you subscribe today. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video.